and welcome to the D&D Cafe. Hello everybody, this is Logan from Coffee Cup Studios. This is going to be one of the first videos in the series where we show you how to actually make a character in D&D 5th edition. So starting off here, we're going to kind of go into how to create a backstory for a character, how to choose a race, and how to choose a class, because those are the most important things you actually kind of have to choose before you start rolling stats and things like that. And rolling stats will be covered in a later video. This video is just going to kind of focus on how to choose a race, how to choose a class, and then how to write a backstory. I'm going to go over one of my example backstories that I've already written, and kind of give you an idea of what is expected of a first level character. Of course, if your DM asks you to write a backstory for a higher level character, they're going to be a bit more in depth than the one I've written here. This is just kind of a quick example of what a first level character might use. All right, now going over here, I am on D&D Beyond's website. All this stuff can be found in the Player's Handbook or the various expansions to D&D. I'm just going to kind of scroll through here and kind of show off all the various races. I've already kind of chosen one. I'm going to be making a character sheet for a Halfling Bard, which is perfect because, the Halfling Bard is pictured right here. And so, as you can see, there are quite a few races. A lot of these are in various expansions and things like that. But all of these can be found here on D&D Beyond's website, which I think is a really, really cool resource. I'm not sponsored by D&D Beyond. I just find it to be a really, really, really handy resource for kind of looking up things on the spot, so you don't have to kind of dig through a book and stuff like that. But yeah, so also, if you kind of click here, it'll take you to another page where it shows you kind of all the information. Kind of the information lower on the page here is what I'm going to be getting into in a later video when we're actually rolling the character stats and making a character sheet. But kind of what you need to pay attention to when you're just kind of thinking about what race to choose is just the first few little paragraphs here about kind of how that race generally behaves, the general size, and things like that. I can give an example here. Like if you look at this little information for halflings, this is going to be very different than if I clicked on, say a Dragonborn. This would give kind of a lot different kind of information on how that race generally behaves in a typical D&D setting. And then you kind of have to go over what class you're going to play. Now, I'm also on D&D Beyond's website in the classes section. And scroll down through here, you can see there are quite a few. Not nearly as many as there are races, but there are quite a few resources at your disposal. Makes for a lot of kind of variety and differences between characters you might create. And you can also see here that these are the base ones from the Player's Handbook and things like that. And as you scroll down, it has different sections. Unearthed Arcana is one that is not typically used in D&D. But it is kind of a bunch of just expanded rule books, basically, for classes and races and things like that. And then if you're familiar with the D&D podcast Critical Role, they also have one of their classes on here. Their other class that I know of called the Gunslinger. That's quite a fun class to play. I found that this class here is kind of a combination between a Warlock and a Paladin. So it's an interesting class. It's kind of a multi-class, if you will. But I'm going to go ahead and click on Bard, and kind of same thing. I'm going to get into kind of all this information on the lower half in a later video when we're actually rolling and making the character sheet. But kind of when you're choosing your class, the stuff you need to kind of pay attention to is the first few paragraphs here, where it kind of gives a general blurb about kind of how this class kind of fits into a typical D&D setting, and kind of how they generally behave in a D&D setting. Another example kind of going back here is if I click on Bard, it's going to be very different than, say, a Druid and stuff like that. But kind of when you're picking your class, just kind of pay attention to these first few paragraphs, and then you'll kind of get into the more advanced stuff later, and I will kind of go over that in a later video. So now I guess after you've seen kind of some examples of races and classes, I kind of want to get into the backstory that I've pre-written for this, just to kind of give you a quick example of a backstory that might be kind of expected of a first level character. As I mentioned earlier, a first level character is kind of just kind of getting into the world and stuff like that. You're not too experienced with any sort of skills or anything like that. The backstory for a first level character shouldn't be, something where you're incredibly powerful and things like that, because that's just not what a first level character is. A first level character is someone who's just kind of just starting out on their adventures and things like that and doesn't really know how most of the world works. This is why if you're playing with a group of more experienced players, your DM might ask you to start off at a higher level, because this kind of gets you progressing through the game a little bit more quickly. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to start with a first level kind of character and a first level backstory and kind of show you guys how to do that in a future video. And then I'm going to kind of flip over here to the character backstory I have already written. I named my character Duncan Bottlemore, and this is his little quick backstory. Duncan grew up in a small farming town on the outskirts of the Dwarven Empire, with only his mother as company. He had not seen his father in many years. His father, it seems, had left all his possessions behind and left to start a new life for himself somewhere else in the realm. His mother burned all his father's possessions in a fit of anger and sorrow. Out of the smoldering ashes, Duncan pulled a charred violin. Miraculously, the violin had survived the brunt of the flame, and Duncan spent all his free time mending it until one day it was again playable. The violin in question was nothing spectacular, however, it was all he had left of his father. He had heard stories that had been passed down through his family for centuries. In these parts, it was unusual to see a halfling, and he was bullied quite frequently growing up for being different. Despite this, he always kept a positive outlook on life. His mother told him that if he believed in himself, everything would be okay. Eventually, Duncan became quite good at playing the violin, and he began holding small concerts in town. The village began loving his performing, until the summer festival. It was a bright day, and the sun shone off the many tents and booths set up in the town square. The smell of fresh baked goods and sweets wafted through the air. The crowds began to gather at the small stage in the middle of the square as they knew the time of Duncan's performance was drawing near. Duncan walked up onto the stage, and the crowd began to cheer. He paid them no mind. He had to focus on his playing. He drew his bow across this small brick of rosin, and then he drew his bow across the strings. A high, shrill note rang out, and a hush fell across the crowd. Slowly, he began to move his bow, and more notes sprung to life. As he played, he seemed to weave a story of emotion. The crowd stayed silent, mesmerized by the beautiful melody. The song began to swell, the notes coming faster, to a point where no mortal's hand could move that fast. And then, the crowd realized, his hand wasn't moving across the strings. It seemed as though an invisible hand was playing the notes. Someone cried out. Duncan's eyes flew open, and his once blue irises were glowing a bright gold. The crowd began to panic, and so did Duncan. He didn't know what was going on. Suddenly, he hit a wrong note, and a shrill screech echoed over the square. A tent lit on fire, then another. Some guards in the crowd drew their weapons and began to close in on Duncan. He wasn't sure what was happening. He didn't know what to do. His instincts got the better of him as he stood there on the stage, and he began to run. When he had finally stopped, he was somewhere deep in the forest. All he knew was he could never go back to that town. At least, not now. Not until he discovered what had happened. So that's a quick example of a first-level backstory and kind of what, as a DM, I would kind of be looking for, because it kind of goes through, explains kind of your origin, kind of where you're from. It kind of goes through kind of how you kind of got your powers or why you are kind of the way you are, kind of some various things on how your character kind of behaves, and also kind of it leaves it a little bit open-ended, so that way the DM can kind of go off of that and expand and kind of create and weave you into their story, which kind of allows the player to kind of be more engaged into the actual plot line and kind of explains why you're there. But yeah, so that is kind of a little quick rundown of how the classes work, how the races work, and kind of what a typical DM would be expecting of probably a first level backstory. Because yeah, it wasn't like, oh yeah, Duncan, blew up a city and then killed a couple dragons and stuff like that. That isn't what's expected of a first level character. Kind of what's expected of a first level character is you kind of either just discovered your powers or you're just kind of testing out your powers or something like that. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next video. Hopefully the next one will be actually rolling a character sheet for this character. We're going to be rolling up one for Duncan, so this way you can kind of see where kind of some of his stats are coming from and why certain things are going to be the way they are.